Good morning, everyone. I'm Tim O'Brien, the Senior Executive Editor of Bloomberg Opinion. This is our Tuesday morning politics live stream, and I'm joined today by two colleagues, friends, and very astute and learned columnists, Andreas Kluth and Mark Champion. In various ways, each of them covers international affairs, national security, and the chaotic and dangerous world we're all observing and living in right now. We're at the table today to talk about the Israel-Iran war, the possibility of a broadening conflict in the Middle East, and all the unpredictables surrounding the various players who are butting heads right now. Primarily the US, Israel, and Iran, but inevitably towards the end of this conversation, we'll also take in Russia and perhaps talk about China a little bit. So let's go from there. Andreas, Donald Trump made an abrupt and apparently urgent exit from the G7 talks in Alberta, Canada last night after he warned the residents of Tehran, Iran, to evacuate the city, prompting lots of speculation that he was headed back to the Situation Room in the White House because there might be an intensification of an already hot conflict between Israel and Iran. Let's use that as a departure point to try to discern what the president's actual intentions are and how that's going to affect everything that we're watching right now in the Middle East.
Well, that was an example for how Trump has been all over the place geographically in that case, but also conceptually, mentally, rhetorically. So he was at this summit, day one of two, at a summit that had many other problems to begin with. This Iran-Israel war then came on top of that, and the seven summiteers just did not see eye to eye, especially Trump and Macron, but all of them. He then abruptly, as you said, left. That was U-turn number one. At the time, his spokeswoman said it is because of the situation Iran-Israel. Macron seemed to suggest he understands if he has to go to negotiate a ceasefire. Trump, being Trump, then just insulted Macron, said that has absolutely nothing to do with why he's leaving. On top of that, and there are many other things, trade as well, but on top of that, he had gone into that G7 summit saying he will not sign any common statement on Iran-Israel because the other six wanted to call for de-escalation. He then turned around on that as well and did sign it after they tweaked the language. So he's all over the place. And that is sort of the pattern of the last few days, maybe weeks, in that here in Washington, everyone's talking about, is this part of an elaborate deception campaign by him that he knew this was going to happen all along? Or, did he lose control, or he never had control over Bibi, over Netanyahu? And now, belatedly, he was informed that something was going to happen because they started moving U.S. troops out of Iraq on Wednesday already. But now, once he realized that Netanyahu and Israel was going to do this, is he trying to spin it to basically have it both ways? So at the moment, I would say, and certainly sort of his own team, as well as his base, especially the MAGA base, is completely divided over this. So it is not clear whether he knows what he's going to do or what even exactly what he wants to have happen, whether that is diplomacy. Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, put out a statement that he does want a diplomatic solution. Trump says we're not in it and we want to stay out of it, but we might be in it. So it is all things at once. So clearly this is taking shape. I feel that alone is quite dangerous.
That's what you've just described, Andreas, is sort of the signal characteristic of the Trump administration, which is chaos. His advocates and supporters say it's strategic chaos. It's designed to keep his opponents or other negotiators off balance. Critics, myself among them, say there's simply no there there, and he's not playing 3D chess. He can barely play hopscotch. All of that, when it comes to some of the smaller matters of the presidency, may not matter too much. But when we get involved with geopolitics and global war, of course it does. And Mark, how do you think Netanyahu right now at this moment views Trump in the context of U.S. support for an intensifying war?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I suspect that there's, as much confusion, in Tehran and in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, about exactly what Trump is going to do as there is, in the White House. And that really matters. From the point of view of Netanyahu, he has the space that he wanted to maneuver. And so, he's in a, from his point of view, he's in a good place. The American, administration, isn't going in on this with him. And of course, he would rather that they did, so that they can take on the buried nuclear sites at Fordo and so on. But at least he's being given, all the rope he needs. And I suspect that what we're seeing really is the tail wagging the dog, the Israeli, tail wagging the dog, and that kind of point, that departure was made, before hostilities began, and the Americans and Trump in particular, accepted that this was going to be done and gave it a green light. And at this point, for Trump, when you think about it, it's not so long ago, a few years ago, when he was haranguing Obama to say that, he's going to start a war in Iran because he doesn't know how to negotiate. He's too weak to negotiate. And here you have, a war that's begun in Iran, and Trump is saying, I'm not in a mood to negotiate. I mean, he did try. There's no question about it. And I suspect that there are kind of theories that this was a very elaborate ruse to deceive the Iranians into to not be ready when the Israelis would strike. But my guess is that it was not a ruse, that Trump genuinely wanted to negotiate a solution to the nuclear deal. That's what his promise to his base was, his electoral promises, and it's kind of his MO. I'm good at deals. He doesn't say I'm good at wars. So I think we're in a really confusing place because Trump is no longer actually following the policy that he intended.
Well, and his goal always is to portray himself as the puppeteer and not the puppet. And as you just mentioned, this looks a lot like the tail wagging the dog in terms of Israel taking action and the U.S. being forced then to choose how best to support it while maintaining its own options. You mentioned earlier that Trump had been advocating for negotiations towards a ceasefire, and in the midst of that, Netanyahu attacked Iran. Do you think that Israel, and particularly Israel under Netanyahu, is simply exploiting gaps in Trump's own sophistication and experience around the Middle East, and using this as an opportunity to really expand its own horizons and take the kind of aggressive actions it has?
Well, in all honesty, I think this is not primarily about Trump. I don't think it's primarily about the U.S. I think this is, first of all, about how the Israelis and the security establishment within Israel see their interests, which have changed quite dramatically since October 2023. And they are, in the midst of, and from their point of view, reorganizing the security world that surrounds them in the Middle East. This is for them an existential task. Existential, not in the sense that they think they're, about that anyone around them is strong enough to destroy them at this given moment, but for that's how they see the necessary way of securing a future for Israel, in which they can have a kind of a normal economy, a normal life, etc. So I think there's something quite fundamental there. I think there are other issues, in terms of the timing and Netanyahu's own personal interests. Gaza is become a loser for him politically. He is still vulnerable because it was on his watch that October the 7th was allowed to happen.
And he was in legal trouble.
Yes, and he has all kinds of legal trouble. So, I do think that there are other issues to do with the timing, but fundamentally, I don't think that the determinant is the U.S. We often tend to sort of, and much of the world always, sees the U.S. as the kind of, the be all and end all of everything that happens on every sort of, block of the planet. It simply isn't. I mean, it's a very big player, a very important player, especially in the Middle East, especially to do with Israel. But when Joe Biden was trying to, get Netanyahu to change his policies, in Gaza, he was ignored. And I think, in essence, that is what has happened to Trump also. That he was, Netanyahu's told him, look, I'm going to have to do this. Trump put a 60-day, ultimatum to the Iranians. And he said, as soon as that ultimatum is over, I'm going in. And I suspect that's what happened. And Trump has gone along with it. And, yes, he's an opportunist. He's a quite cunning politician in his way, I think. And he, will try to turn this to his advantage.
You're wise to point out that this isn't about the U.S., though I think the U.S. is a necessary player here. We'll come back to sort of parse those differences in a second. But Andreas, I wanted to, before we finish talking about Trump and his intentions and move more deeply into Israel and Iran's own interests, I want to talk a bit about the circle of people surrounding Trump. He's never been someone who's taken advice really from anyone. He prides himself on being a universal authority on most subjects that cross the Resolute desk in the Oval Office. Do you think he's listening to anyone right now? Rubio at the State Department, Hegseth at Defense, outside advisors, his envoys to the Middle East. What's the universe of information enveloping him, and how is he taking cues from any of those people?
It's a very problematic universe, and I just talked to a previous national security official in his first administration. That person is very worried by the trends. I'll just give you a few data points. The first national security advisor of the second term, Michael Waltz, was forced out, in effect demoted to the United Nations. And the reason apparently was not so much a signal chat that he had been in or anything, but that it became clear that he had been coordinating with Netanyahu for a coordinated U.S.-Israeli strike on Iran, and Trump did not like that. That person, Waltz, was replaced by Marco Rubio, who has 4 jobs in total. He's also the Secretary of State, and now he's also National Security Advisor in name. That takes priority, apparently, so that involves constantly being with or around or at the call of the president, and therefore not also Secretary of State. There's a lot of disruption happening because of a reorganization, which is in effect a MAGA takeover internally at the State Department. And then you have, these are all members of the Security Council, problematic individuals leading the intelligence service, and a very problematic individual, Pete Hegseth, leading the Pentagon, which is consumed by, you mentioned chaos earlier.
Define problematic. When you say
chaotic, in other words, very many people have left. They're not holding news briefings at the Pentagon. That's the least of the problems at the moment, but he doesn't trust anyone because there were leaks. There was a Signalgate affair that he was involved in, and he's waging an internal culture war, anti-woke, anti-DEI. He keeps repeating the word lethality. He's in a different space, Pete Hegseth. He's a former Fox. They're all, Fox News stars, influenced by reality television. He, in a very good profile of him, says he's playing Secretary of Defense. So they're enacting this, but he has no prior or no proven ability to manage any large bureaucracy, never mind the largest, which is the Pentagon. And he is, quite frankly, also a toady and a yes man. So I should say that Rubio Rubio has also fired about 100 plus people at the National Security Council, a lot of people with genuine expertise, including expertise relevant to this situation, as I heard, specific examples of have recently left. And the priority at state, at Pentagon, the National Security Council, at intelligence services is now away from giving options, analysis in a sort of Brent Scowcroft way, if that rings a bell, and more towards affirming, for your own political survival, basically loyalty, fealty to Trump, affirming his whims. And that is the danger. In private, Rubio probably does give Trump analysis. Whether Trump, as you said, listens to anybody or just listens to the last person he talked to, at lunch, someone else, then at breakfast, that is another question. But a lot of people who were even people on his first National Security Council in the last term are very worried that the expertise is not there and that he's not hearing the important, genuine, honest, and difficult, uncomfortable truths he needs to hear at this moment about scenarios and their risks.
That gives us a departure point about where I think the U.S. enters this conflict, Mark. Israel's demonstrated an incredible ability to reorder the Middle Eastern map since the Hamas attacks and murders of October of 2023. Syria has been neutered militarily, and in just over the last week or so, Israel has defenestrated a lot of Iranian air defenses. It's taken out the nuclear enrichment facility at Natanz. Some of Iran's most senior military officials have been killed, and almost as soon as they're replaced, another one gets killed. But if their ultimate goal is to end Iran's nuclear program, as Netanyahu has said, they're going to have to go, as everyone knows, to the Fordo site, which is inside a mountain, 100 miles south of Tehran, and can only be gotten at with bunker buster bombs that only the United States has. Israel doesn't have those bombs. If that is indeed the only way they can get in there, that's the conventional wisdom, they will need U.S. support to take this as far as they'd like to, right?
Yes, and I'd say on top of that there are a few unknowns here. One is we don't actually know if the U.S. bunker busting bombs are the only things that could do it. These are huge things. They're 15 U.S. or 14 metric tons. 2.5 tons of which is TNT or fissile material. So I mean, these are absolutely massive. But even so, you're having to get 90 meters or so below the ground, underneath a mountain. So more than 90 meters, right? So it isn't a given that the U.S. would be able to do it. We also don't, nobody will know until, somebody tries as to what they can do. And, we don't, it's also, these kinds of complexes are, they have other vulnerabilities like power supplies and all these sorts of things. So I don't doubt that, there is a way to take, even Fordo offline for a while. The question is, even if you do destroy these things, are you able to stop the Iranians from going from a bomb if they want to? So, and this is why they're going after scientists, because there is they've been working on this for decades at this point. They've invested vast sums in it, and that knowledge exists. The technical know-how exists. The tests have been done. So they, if they can, in another site, they're already building another site that's even deeper than Fordo. If they can rebuild there, then they would be able to go forward. The real concern about Fordo is that, they have centrifuges down there. We also know that they have a lot of, 60% enriched fuel in stocks. That is can be quite quickly enriched to 90%. So that's really the source of all the speculation about, how close the Iranians are to a bomb. They are certainly, they're certainly close to having enough fuel to put into a bomb. The other unknown is that we simply don't know, how close they are to building a warhead to just sort of slot that stuff into and put it on the end of a missile so that they can fire it. We don't know that. There's a revelation today by the, Iranian exile organization that, made the original expose of the Iranian program back in 2003, I think it was, or 2002. And they say that they found a new testing site, in the desert where these kind of, warhead, technologies are being worked out. And the bottom line is we don't know. Maybe the Israeli intelligence does. I wouldn't put anything past them, given their, extreme penetration, both, of the Iranian elite now, as is clear, and of course of Hezbollah. So, a lot of these answers, we just don't know a lot of these questions we don't know the answers to. And I actually don't know, the most important thing is I don't know how much the Israelis know about what they can do.
Well, and as you astutely noted in one of your columns, bombing may not end the bomb. And if it doesn't end the bomb, what are you left with, right? You're left with a possibly more untenable situation with Iran backed into a corner, and perhaps feeling it only has last resorts, right?
This is the danger, right? This is the danger that, Israel is proving incredibly militarily and technologically successful in this campaign. The Iranians are really on the back foot, no question about it. And that of course feeds a desire to just sort of go forward and exploit the air superiority. The Israeli jets can just fly all over the place and drop what they want where they want. So this is, from the Israeli point of view, an extraordinary opportunity to deal with a hostile power. But the reason we keep talking about regime change is, where does it go? Until you have a change of regime that no longer wants to build a bomb and no longer wants to destroy Israel and wipe it from the face of the earth, you haven't really advanced very far, other than to delay what they're capable of doing, not their intentions, not what they will do in the future.
And of course, all of it's informed by ancient religious and cultural differences and modern geopolitical tensions, including the creation of the State of Israel and various other factions within the Middle East. It's a complicated chessboard, right?
It really is. The irony here is that, not really the irony, but the thing to really keep our eyes on is that the Middle East has changed quite dramatically recently. It is actually more, structurally friendly to Israel than it has been almost since the formation of the state. The Saudis, the UAE, the Gulf states, Egypt, none of these are fundamentally hostile anymore. They share a deep distrust of Iran. And so Israel is potentially in a very good position. And this is the disaster of what happened, from the Israeli point of view, strategic point of view. That's the disaster of what happened in 2023 in October, when Hamas basically scuppered all that advance and sent us back to a kind of very basic Stone Age struggle, and back to the Palestinian question. And here we are dealing with Iran. Things are very much in flux, but the potential for a much better Middle East is clearly there.
Andreas, how would you describe the relationship between Netanyahu and Trump?
They're very similar people in a way. Great at staying in power, disingenuous, often good at TV, trained on, at least in one case, reality television. They don't trust each other. As you know, Trump held a long grudge against Bibi because Netanyahu congratulated Biden after his victory, as one should, as was normal. But Trump didn't like that. So being pro-Israel was also part of Trump's shtick. But I think when Trump realizes he could be played or that Netanyahu will do what he wants, he tends to walk away from it. He doesn't want to get blamed. So, for instance, on everything about Gaza, I think he's sort of trying to wash his hands of it. Trump has done a lot of things in the weeks leading up to this attack on Israel, on Iran. I'm sorry. I suggest he was fed up as well and is going to go his own way. He made a deal with the Houthis that essentially ignored what the Houthis were doing toward Israel. He made a deal with Hamas to get out an American hostage in a way that ignored what the Israelis wanted. He talked to this new Syrian leader, even as the Israelis were bombing parts of Syria. And in all these ways, and of course, he was negotiating with his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, even as Netanyahu has been saying all along, no, there's no point, let's just bomb them together. So he's also saying, look, I'm doing my own thing. There's actually, it's a tactical, it's an opportunistic, two opportunistic people posing for the cameras opportunistically when it suits them, but then otherwise doing their own thing in their own interests. So I think there's nothing that would sort of oblige him to have Netanyahu's back or anything of that sort.
Do you think, though, he will, step up for Netanyahu if needed?
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. I think Trump wouldn't stand up for anybody else except for himself if that person needed it. But no, I don't think for Netanyahu. No, I don't think Trump has that at all. I think Trump would step up if he thought Trump, was at risk of looking weak. Especially, he's very, you've written about Taco. Trump always chickens out. That's a stock market and trade tariff term, but it's also increasingly, people are saying it's applicable to his foreign policy as well. He talks a tough game, Trump, but then he tends to chicken out. So if something happens and Trump risks looking weak, then he would step up. But in general, Trump, and remember his own base, including people like Tucker Carlson, which I find interesting that has said, Tucker said in a newsletter, Trump is complicit in this attack and his presidency rides on this. The J.D. Vance wing, the isolationist wing that wants above all one thing, never to have another Middle Eastern or any forever war. That was the whole purpose. Trump keep us out of these forever wars. They don't want him to step in, and Trump knows that. And I think in his own heart and in his own team and party and base, there is now that rift, and that'll influence him, no doubt. But unless he's forced to, I don't think he psychologically feels the need to step in to rescue Netanyahu.
Mark, we're almost out of time here, but before we turn the clock on, you wear many hats for us at Bloomberg Opinion, including being an astute observer of Russia and the Russia-Ukraine war. Overnight, Russia shelled Kyiv again, and I think this is an important and also adjacent topic related to what we're talking about now, which is, does Putin see the Middle Eastern conflict as a distraction for Trump? Trump has barely put any barriers in Putin's way anyway, in terms of prosecuting the Ukraine invasion as he sees fit and prefers. But does this almost play into his hands further? And in a way, does that also inform how China views its own interests in Southeast Asia? An overstretched and overtaxed U.S. is a U.S. that could be taken advantage of.
Yes. So, fundamentally, the entire Israeli conflict, starting with Hamas and now moving on to Iran, this has all been very much, a boon for President Putin. I think, we should recognize, first of all, that, Trump tried to get some kind of deal on the war in Ukraine, failed, walked away. He has walked away. So, to that extent, this doesn't really make a big difference. But what it does do is, yes, every time that, as Pete Hegseth has acknowledged, that he diverted some of the air defenses that were, allocated for Ukraine, and he diverted them to Israel. That's a boon. That's a plus for Putin as he fights, the war with Ukraine, and he's, in his air war. And let's not forget, the number of missiles that Russia is sending every day in Ukraine exceeds the number of missiles that the Iranians are sending at Israel. So that's all very important to him. It's a win for him. Every distraction, from what he's doing is a win. As for China, I think in the broad sense, you're absolutely right. Everything, that for China, it's a kind of, if the U.S. gets dragged into something in the Middle East, there may be upsides and downsides, but in general, the broad point for the Chinese is yet another distraction from the U.S. For the U.S. from thinking about us, countering us, repositioning military supplies to places that we actually care about. So in that sense, yes, it's a plus. And I remember speaking years ago to a quite senior Chinese politician who just said that the whole, starting with the Iraq War, from the Chinese point of view, the U.S. has just made one long strategic error, which is to be distracted to other stuff, and has been left behind.
On that happy note, we've run out of time. Mark Champion and Andreas Kluth, you are both excellent columnists for Bloomberg Opinion. Readers can find their work on the Bloomberg Opinion website. I'm Tim O'Brien. I'm the senior executive editor of Bloomberg Opinion. We'll be here again next week for another Politics live stream. Until then, please stay tuned in, and we'll keep watching. Thank you for joining us today.